Hi, good evening, everyone. We have a very interesting session today, which is on building infrastructure for digital India, how India should loosen its purse string and what the country should do and avoid. And we all know we have gone through a very unprecedented times where we have, for the first time in the history of India, a negative growth rate. And unprecedented times require unprecedented measures. 2020 has made us witness that innovation is no more a fanciful strategic word, but being innovative is what businesses, as well as individuals, require to survive. And that going digital is not an option anymore, but a lifeline for this world to remain connected and functional during times which are extraordinary. With the push from the government through its Digital India mission, both India and private sectors are moving rapidly to establish high speed mobile and broadband connectivity across the country to keep Indian consumers and businesses online. But to achieve the Digital India goal and harness its full potential, a robust, unfailing, and ready to scale physical, software, and security infrastructure is absolutely essential. In addition, the government needs to ensure that the availability of digital infrastructure and services and the last mile connectivity in rural areas is there in place while creating awareness for their adoption. With us today, we have a very esteemed set of speakers in our panel. We have Mr. T.R. Dua, who is the Director General TAIPA, Mr. Ashutosh Vasant, Director Project Operation and Maintenance, RailTel, Mr. K.S. Rao, who is the CEO of Network Software and Services Business STL, and Mr. Gautam Billa, who is the Senior Director of Field Systems Engineering, CNR. I'll go over and do a quick introduction of each of the esteemed panelists. Mr. T.R. Dua is the Director General of TIPA and Chairman ITU APT and has over 35 years of very deep experience in the telecom sector. His experience includes every facet of telecom, and we are very grateful that Mr. Dua has been able to join us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Dua. Welcome to the session. Mr. Gautam Billa is a Senior Director of Pre-Sales and System Engineering, CNI India. Gautam Billa is a telecom professional with over 15 years of experience in the industry. In his current role at CNI Communications, he is responsible for all pre-sales, business development, and solution engineering activities in India, in the India region. Welcome to the session, Mr. Billa.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you. Mr. Ashutosh Vasant is an experienced director of project operations and maintenance with a demonstrated history of working in the telecommunications industry. He's got strong business development professional skills in pre-sales, strategic leadership, rail transportation, signaling, optical transport technologies, and commissioning. Welcome to the show, Mr. Ashutosh Vasant. Welcome to the session.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Mr. K.S. Rao joined Sterlite Technologies in 1993 to set up the company's optical fiber cable plant in Aurangabad and soon became instrumental in growing its fiber cable services and business operations in India, China, and Brazil. He currently leads the company's program to drive digital inclusion in India as a Chief Executive Officer for Network Software and Services Business. Welcome to the session, Mr. Rao.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would now request Mr. Billa to start the session with a brief presentation that sets the tone of the conversation today. Mr. Billa?
Sure, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll just dive in. My name is Gautam Billa, and I run system engineering at CNI in India. What I want to start with today is just to give you a context of what our journey has been so far from a networks perspective and from an infrastructure perspective in India. We pretty much started with the base infrastructure, as we call it, One Industry 1.0, wherein the connectivity was used to basically connect users together. And this was a world where the telcos played an important role to connect, let's say, either fixed line to fixed line or mobile phones to mobile phone connectivity. Then came the world of which we call as 2.0, which was driven more by content and data providers or content players. examples of this could be the Amazons, Googles, Netflixes of the world. And that brought about a revolution in the cloud space as well, wherein now these users which were already connected to the network started connecting back into the cloud and driving or gaining content from the cloud. So this was actually 2.0, and this allowed us to build networks right from the access into the core and then connecting back to the cloud. Now, what's happening right now is we are entering into this phase which we call as 3.0, and we call that as a platform economy or a digital economy. Now, what this entails or what this drives for us is an entire ecosystem which is driven by the underlying base infrastructure. And this base infrastructure now becomes extremely critical for us to drive everything in the overall economy. And why I say that is because of this. So there was a thriving IT market in India. These are a couple of examples here, and this was primarily consumed by the enterprise space. This could be either hardware, software, servers, and a lot more things. Now, what we see is the GCNs, as we call them, the cloud players have come in and they have started to carve out a piece of this market. So this gray section here would be around a $40 billion market annually in India. And a good portion of that is now starting to get into the cloud space. So this is what happened. This is what has happened on the enterprise space, and a lot more cloud players getting into this market right now. A very similar thing is now starting to happen with the retail space. As we see it, the retail market in India is almost touching $1 trillion right now. And the e-commerce market starting to actually carve out a piece of business from the e-commerce space. So what's happening there is, again, from the retail market, there are new business models which are starting to come up and drive.
Later, I'm in a meeting now.
So there are new business models which are actually driving and coming into this space and driving this digital economy, as we call it. What we see happening is a lot of these different spaces that we call very different industries are going to be driven by, let's say, apps going forward. And these apps are going to be based out of two base infrastructure platforms, the cloud platform and the connect platform. So this is what shows us how important the cloud platforms and the connectivity platforms are going to become going forward. It's not only just users talking to each other or users watching data. It's the entire ecosystem which starts getting driven out of these two platforms. And hence the scale and reliability of these platforms becomes a big aspect that we should be talking about. So going on to the next one, I'll be talking about the scale and the scale of connectivity platforms and cloud platforms in India. So the way we see it today is there are about 600 million broadband users in India. Data is one of the cheapest, and the data usage per user is one of the highest. Now, with that puts a lot of pressure on the underlying connectivity platforms and the economies of scale that drive these platforms. What we see is back in 2015, when we were in a 3G kind of scenario, and 2020, when we entered into a 4G scenario, the data traffic has gone about 40 times. And I definitely don't see why that would happen, why that would not happen as we go from 4G to 5G from 2020 to 2025. I definitely see that growth is going to be a similar or a bigger growth which will be coming up. Now, how do we actually prepare for this scale, and how do we actually make cost-effective infrastructures to actually drive this scale that we are talking about? So I think there are a few things that need to happen from an India perspective. The first one is definitely, if we have to scale the data with this kind of a rate, there has to be fiber densification. Of course, there has to be advancements in the wireless technologies, and there are being advancement in that area. But once you touch the fiber network, I think that densification of the fiber is going to be extremely key. From an innovation standpoint, we see that the technology innovation is happening. In the last 15 years, we've been able to scale up the capacity that a single strand of fiber can carry up to about 84 times. So there's a Moore's law which comes into picture, wherein your capacity gets doubled and the cost curve gets bent. That's pretty much been happening in the connectivity world as well. And there are architectural choices that we are coming out with, which will help us drive that scale and the cost curve that we're talking about. The other,
Mr. Billa, sorry to button, but if you can just speed up a little bit, because we have got very interesting conversation post this. Your presentation is very, very interesting. If you could just go a little faster.
Sure. So if I look at it from an infrastructure perspective, again, the number of fiber failures which happen in India, that's almost double to what we see elsewhere in the world. So that's definitely a concern, and that's something that we need to look at jointly as, let's say, service providers, operators, and the government itself, to come out with some initiatives that would actually help us reduce the reliability and or increase the reliability and reduce the cost of this network. And finally, the automation piece. There is a lot of AI and automation which is driving today's networks, which we believe will help us achieve these objectives. And lastly, from a cloud and connectivity perspective, data is moving closer to the users. We're seeing things like edge compute come into the picture, and we are seeing very reliable connectivity being built under those cloud platforms to be able to drive this aim of cloud and connectivity going together. There is 5G coming in, which will help us further drive the wireless side of things along with the entire ecosystem. And that will help us actually achieve this aim of getting into a more digital and fully digital economy. So with that, I'll wrap up and get into more detailed conversations. Thanks for your time. I pass it back to you, Dr. Jaijit. So you're on mute.
Unmute.
Jaijit, you are muted.
You're on mute.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Billa. I was saying that your presentation was absolutely fantastic. And but in order to implement all that you said, we need to accelerate Digital India Drive. And to accelerate the Digital India Drive, the government needs to engage the private sector through efficient and collaborative models. At least that's what I believe. That would allow viable business cases for the private players as well as meet the Digital India objectives. Where are we on this currently, and what are the key challenges that the private sector is facing? And I'll request Mr. Dua to start off with his views on this question.
Good evening, my fellow panelists. Thanks, Jaijit. I think you set the ball rolling. Honestly, you said that we gone through, not only we gone through, we are going through an unprecedented time. And it continues to be, right? Let me just start with 4 R's. Why do we need this, and how do we say? And as you rightly said, digitalization is no more an option. It is a mandatory. One is that if you need to reinvent yourself, you need to further restructure yourself, and then you need to resolve and reboot yourself. These are 4 R's, I mean, you can add many more R's into this, but I was thinking, under this theme, what you said is these are very essential ones. And the topic that is very, very relevant today, as I think Gautam rightly said, the transition from voice to data in the country has been achieved very rapidly. I think what we have done in 2 years, probably we won't have done in more than 5 years' time. So what I'm going to do is, in quick one, you have around 5-7 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
So just what is the importance of digitalization, and what is the kind of investment that you need? And third one is, what are the policy initiative that you said, and how do we go about taking into account the challenges that we face? The transition from voice to data-centric telecom in the country, we have seen is a very rapid space. Operating digitally has been the only way to stay in business. We have seen it, at least this 1 year, what we all have learned, wouldn't have learned in a minimum 5 years' time. We wouldn't have learned now this. The digitalization had kept the society, kept the business alive and connected. Remote work, online shopping, digital content consumption, platform action, digital. Several brick and mortar businesses which adopted to the digitalization and contactless modes to keep their operation running. As a result, India, we witnessed digitalization at a very rampant pace during the pandemic, leading to a huge jump in data. Today, almost close to 13 to 15 GB per capita is the data consumption which we've seen today. Not only that, there are investments that we required both sides, as you rightly say, from the private sector, from the government sector, as a sector, what we represent is this. Now, NDCP, if you look at the NDCP, which is again one of the policy which came through after a lot of interaction and involving a lot of stakeholders globally, envisaged to attract 100 billion US dollars in the digital communication by 2020. I don't know whether we will achieve this or not. Therefore, the emphasis also needs to be given on the telecom infrastructure, the status of critical and infrastructure, essential infrastructure, which should enable low-cost financing. Now, there are certain things what the private sector has made the investment and how further private sector can do it. There are certain investment or the initiative which have been taken by the government. One of them is, again, the flagship BharatNet project, which is supposed to connect, I think there's still not 2.5 lakh Gram Panchayat, which is still to be connected. And the number of initiatives which government took to, again, bridge the digital divide by installing infrastructure in the LWE area, Gram Panchayat, and the recent one, connecting the fiber cable of 2,300 kilometers is the Andaman Nicobar one. And recently, again, the emphasis which was laid by the Honorable Prime Minister was to complete fiberization of the 6 lakhs villages in about 1,000 days, which is yet, I think, to be implemented, because a lot of hiccups on that, how do we achieve that fiberization of 6 lakhs village in 1,000 days. The policy initiative, if you look at the policy initiative, government initiative started the Digital India program. If you look back in way back 2015, this program was launched in 2015 to provide universal access to mobile connectivity, public internet access program. And then in 2018, government again notified a very comprehensive transformation policy framework in terms of the National Digital Communication Policy. I will not go into detail what were the objectives. We are all very thorough into this, but the intention was to bring in $100 billion plus connect all the villages and bring broadband speed to 50 Mbps and so on and so forth. There are so many. The main thing was to increase the tower density from present 4.42 per 1,000 to at least 1. If you look at today, we have got around 650,000 towers. And if you look at the per subscriber as on 1.2, 1.3 billion tower, it just says around 1,000 to 1,500 subscriber, which is not enough. And also then the fiberization of these towers, I'm talking of fiberization, today we are just close to around 30-32%, which needs to be made at least by the end of next year is 70%. So there is also laid out that the fiber authority to be made, which is still, I think, needs to be done. There was a program again with the government launch on which is called the self-reliant program. And I'm only talking, there were 5 pillars into that. One of the pillars which was emphasized was the recognizing infrastructure as the most important pillar of the self-reliant. Now, therefore, if you look at the NDCP from the digital infrastructure point of view, it is, if you look at, there was one of the chapter, I would say, was the enhancement of the scope of infrastructure provider to include active sharing by the IP. This is a unique step which has to be taken, and it is still lying with the government. Good, bad, right, wrong, whatever it is. The TRA recommendation came thrice positive, and the government is still in a mood to look at it, but it's still not come. When I say the enhancement of scope, that the IP infrastructure are ready to invest into this infrastructure, which will also facilitate many other new technologies which we are thinking of this. What is the kind of support that we need further from the government is because of this technology evaluation to the 5G launch is around the corner. You might say it will be launched next year, but there are operators who have already done some trials on the existing spectrum in Hyderabad. So therefore, it's around the corner. And I'd like to emphasize that we got excellent, I would say, this policy which we have, and it's an excellent policy, but needs an implementation. Similarly, if you look at the ROW policy of November 2000 policy anywhere globally, anywhere. But what it needs is, it has tested the time. Now 4 years are over on this. Now we are looking at this. We are approaching the government to see that these policies are enforced on the state level, which is not happening. By rotation, by minimum of 4 years time, out of 32 states, we've been able to get only around 28 states which are aligned. But I'm using a word more or less aligned. When I say more or less aligned means, therefore, there is a need to again align them. There are a number of hiccups into somewhere the fees is not aligned, somewhere the single online portal is not there.
I'm sorry to interrupt a very interesting conversation from your side. But if you could just speed it up a little bit.
I'll just quickly, give me another 30 seconds, I'll do that.
Sure.
Now, what is that we are expecting from the government is to just to, as you rightly said, is measures that we need. One is the infrastructure status, which has already been enshrined, which has already been given, but has not been implemented, which needs to be implemented, because this has certain, when it gets implemented, there are certain facilities which accrue to the infrastructure provider. Availability of the government land buildings, which is very easy, but most of the governments have still not been able to do that. Now, there are certain, not summarize the whole thing, is the implementation of the ROW guideline, which is November 2016. Not only but nothing wrong with the guideline, but needs implementation, and also it needs enforcement. Rationalization of the taxes and levies which are happening. You have the admission fees, you have the regularization fees, you have a number of taxes, then you have the property tax which is coming. Then the input tax credit availability made available. Passing out the benefit under the infrastructure status. Tower fiberization and tower erection, rationalization of those fees. Reasonable annual rental to be made available if we are looking at 5G, which will need densification of this tower. And finally, I will just say, although I have a lot to say, but I'll say the enhancement of scope for the IP infrastructure to provide active sharing. Those guys are ready to bring in a lot of investment, but it's still resting with the government. More as we go forward, I'll discuss. Thank you so much for patience.
Thank you. Very, very pertinent points. Thank you so much for enlightening us. Moving to Mr. Rao on the same issues, specifically, what is it that the private sector is really asking for, Mr. Rao?
So thank you. I think first of all, this complete topic about building digital India infrastructure for the digital India is basically a very right timing. I wouldn't take this couldn't have been better timing than this to discuss and what reforms we need to bring. I think we all know that what COVID-19 has sparked a sudden shift in economic activities. We are all aware of that. The digital infrastructure has emerged as a new ways of our living. And I think both public and private sectors are maintaining productivity. I've seen many of IT sectors are actually gone to a work from home model, at least for 2020 till 2025. So there is a great need to really look into that. What specifically private sector is looking at is basically, I think government need to build, in addition to what Mr. Dua has already alluded, I think government need to build a comprehensive roadmap to create a conducive policy environment for building robust digital infrastructure across country. This needs a collaborative approach, no doubt about that. I would suggest that I think a government-led wholesale entity model could actually be a very far-fetching benefit for the country, because it actually comprises participation of both central and state government as well as private service providers. Though the ownership remains with the government, but the revenue could be generated, and where service providers can actually take benefit out of this by actually leasing the fiber or utility applications. Also, I think this is this expect the whole the entire intent and the vision that government is thinking. However, there are going to be some key challenges which we need to be keep in mind, and we need to address it. One of the challenge, as Mr. Dua said, is the slower broadband deployment rate is it's definitely owing to various hurdles, including lack of common ducts and norms, regulations. Also, I think creating cable installation. There is a lot of non-standard practices that exist in the country which need to be streamlined. I think all this, what we discussed about digital infrastructure, cannot be implemented unless you have a very effective ROW policy, as Mr. Dua said. All these are actually going to create a huge level of delays in digital infrastructure creation. I think that's something we need to definitely address. I think this is something which I would say that government has, though the government has come out with some policy in 2016, but it's not been very effectively implemented. I think the state governments, central governments have different jurisdictions, so there is a lot of, I think, uh, implementation challenges in doing that. This requires a correction. I think the accountability matrix. I think there is a need to set up a clear accountability matrix within the government to ensure that timely implementation of these projects happens. So what I would recommend definitely is that coming out with some comprehensive ROW policy. I think this is very important for fully realizing the vision of digital India. And apart from government investments, taking some active part in the investments for digital infrastructure creation in the country. Because I think complex government regulations and current way of working are definitely, I think, critical challenges which we need to address. I think India is definitely on a big mission, I think, of this digital divide between urban and rural. If you have to really address that, some of the policies required to go for a quick change, and which are in context with making that digital infrastructure and making country as a digital India. I think few suggestions in ROW is, I think, single nodal agency. We can adopt a single authority for all ROWs in the country. And also we can make this as a part of essential services, and hence the approval is deemed within 30 days if the authority doesn't provide the permission. And also very important, I've seen in many developed countries that dig once rule must come into country, because we see that essential infrastructure can be planned better. I think that dig once rule could be very, very effective for a country like us. And more importantly, future planning. I think most of the new infrastructure, I would strongly recommend a utility corridor for all greenfield new infrastructure being created, so that we don't need to dig roads then and every time, because once you set up utility corridor, it takes care of your future requirements. I think these are some of the suggestions that I think we're definitely looking forward.
Right. I think very interesting. And I see the common thread of ROW policy between what Mr. Dua said and what you said. Unfortunately, it keeps getting stuck in the issues of local governance at the municipality level and so on, which are really not under the central government. I hope somehow that gets fixed as we move forward. Moving to Mr. Vasant, same question to you, Mr. Vasant. What are the asks of the private sector to make sure that we really have the explosion of digital infrastructure that we're all looking forward to and which we badly need?
Very good evening to the great panel. Am I audible well enough?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Now I want all your ears to me. Why? Because you have set the context for exactly the solution that I'm going to offer. And this is something which I would want each one of us to actually sit and drive together, because this is going to solve every problem that each of my panelists spoke about. Do you know what I want to say? You pointed out huge number of cuts per month per 1,000 kilometers. You pointed out ROW issues. You pointed out reliability of the network that we have. You pointed out issues with fiberization of sites, right? Single solution, Dr. Jaijit. Let me form an agency which integrates the fiber backbones of all those utilities which have secured right of way in the country. Hear me out carefully. Like RailTel has secured right of way along railway tracks. Give me the authority to get one pair along all power lines, OPGW. Both state power corporations, most of the states in their high tension lines have OPGW. Then PGCL, then you have GAIL, then you have ONGC, then you have Oil India, then you have GSPC, you have GNFC, you have GIPL. I know because I started Railtel from Gujarat. I know all these gas agencies carry fiber along track. Now mark my words. If you hand it over to me as a single national telecom infrastructure authority across the country, you reach every nook and corner of this country. Why? You must have seen the Citron ad playing 24/7 on all TV channels. You see the lady putting a bindi while the vehicle is driving on bumps. Where are you focusing? You are focusing on not on creating highways. You are focusing on what is touching the end customer. All the operators, all the business houses, all the entrepreneurs need to think about where they can create money by serving the end customer. They're getting wrongly focused on a need which should have been already there. Now imagine if I create a secured right-of-way national infrastructure by integrating all these fiber networks with proactive manufacturers creating high capacity, high resilience, perfectly single agency managed. Dua Saab can order a 1 exabyte pipe from his app, need not see anybody. You need not go to a commercial officer, need not. You pay online and your provision gets done online with OSS, BSS and a Blue Planet like a solution from Gautam. What I want to tell you is we can rip apart the problems faced by everybody and anybody in the country. Are you with me? Are you syncing with me? This
Yeah,
is
absolutely. Why'd you go ahead?
this
Yes.
is something revolutionary which we can create and solve the problem of daily maintenance of FRTs, daily running around for ROW, daily running around for problems in cuts. You have a secured network created with power, Railtel, gas authorities, state electricity boards, a so resilient a network which helps you meet the target of honorable PM of 6 lakh villages, not in 1000 days, but 500 days. Because once I solve the problem of a secured pre-orderable backbone capacity, it is left to the entrepreneurs to create just the last miles, the last packets, the last containers, the beautiful Mercedes, the BMW, the Audis, and not on creating the road highway. Tell me which manufacturer goes and creates highways. The Audis and BMWs and Mercedes and Mercs all think about creating a car that meets the needs, doesn't talk about creating a road. I'm solving your problem of creating a road. Pitch for this. Go ahead and drive this. You solve the country's issue. Like you did a digitization in 2 months because of COVID, you would change the country in next 6 months. I would create an infrastructure in next 6 months, which you would be proud of. And you would multiply the wheel of economy in the country, because digitization primarily brings in what? It gives equal access of market opportunities, ideation, innovation to everybody in nook and corner of the country, not the few connected. And why I'm saying so, even sitting in Delhi, in East Kidwai Nagar, I am now changing every other operator to Railwire from Railtel because of a reliability issue. So I'm seeing it so close. When you have problems sitting in Delhi, imagine what about nooks and corners of this country? And you solve this out with this solution. I have this take on it. I want the panel to react. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasant. I think that's very, very interesting. I recollect that in 2009 BJP manifesto, which was a section introduced by the then the IT cell in charge, Pradyut Bora, was exactly what you're saying, Mr. Vasant. And we still haven't seen the light of the
Let's
day.
implement this now.
Of course, I'm sure if people like you push for it and you go for it, I'm sure it'll get implemented.
Let's together.
Thanks for bringing it to the panel.
Let's strive together and make this happen.
I'll move to Mr. Billa and in fact request him to react to what Mr. Vasant said, as well as add to whatever else he may want to add from a private sector perspective.
I think we do see some very common themes as the panelists have spoken here. And there is definitely a need to create this base infrastructure. And from a demand perspective, I do agree with all the panelists that there is immense demand which is there in the country, and there is no dearth of people asking for the overall bandwidth that needs to drive on this. But definitely the constraint right now is on the infrastructure side, and specifically from a fiber perspective. there is a lot of demand for fiber, which, let's say, which provides a high reliability and a high uptime between the major cities in the country, which are becoming the data center hubs. So completely agree with all the panelists that there's definitely a need for creating a solid base infrastructure in terms of fiber, and then kind of coupling that up with the data center infrastructure that is getting created in the country. Right.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Billa. So I think it's been a very, very interesting round. Unfortunately, we seem to be running out of time, as what usually happens when it's a very interesting conversation. So I'll quickly go to another question that I had in my mind. But if you could respond to it very quickly in 1 to 2 lines. And the question is this: that what are the essential steps that the private players and the governments need to take immediately to mitigate challenges and ease of hindrances that currently stand in between building the right capability for a digitally inclusive India? How do we really get forward with it? And I'll again go in the same sequence and request Mr. Dua to share his views.
Thank you very much, Jaijit. First of all, let me just react to what Ashutosh said. I would use the word, if the wishes were horses, I think everyone would have done that. My point is a very good, right, that secured right of way is the best thing one could do. We look at FCC, which about 3 years back, they enforced it. The structure that they had, the local bodies, they enforced on this. That's all. Now, here is a situation where the ROW November 2016 guidelines are there. We have a very unique example. We work in a federal structure. Local body says, is my revenue stream. Let me give you a Delhi picture itself. Everybody agrees, including the chief secretary agrees, that, okay, these are the guidelines, central government, I'll agree. And the corporator sits there, he said, nothing doing. I do not work under chief secretary. My structure is different. I'm an autonomous body. And the same thing flows down. If you go to panchayats, you go to Goa, there is total panchayat raj itself, 196 panchayats. They run the rules there. Now, let me not, because we can go on and on. The way I think it can do is both the government and the private sector need to work. Like Rao rightly said, there is a need to have a common duct policy. Yes, it should be common. Then therefore, there is a need now to amend these ROW rules, which again, you call it a wish list, you call whatever, we have given that list. But the underlying is it has to be enforced lawfully, it has to be enforced. Plus the other thing, but normal, if you want to fiberize, or you want to go to the towers creation, you need to give them the essential. I can't use the word secured because it will probably take time, but essential right of way facility. That's where, if you want this, and it's a parallel activity, Jaijit. It's not a serial activity. You want 5G, you want IoT, you want ARRR, you think, let me give the spectrum, 5G will be done, it will not be done. These are both parallel activities.
Absolutely. In fact, multi-utility ducts has been part of the smart city plans of every city. Out at least 48 to 49 of the 98 first cities had multi-utility duct. Not Absolutely. One of them has been able to implement it. I'm so surprised. Even NDMC, which is very well funded and has got better capabilities, found it quite difficult, frankly speaking. And I think those are challenges. But in the interest of time, I'll move on, and rightly pointed, Mr. Dua, I agree with you. I'll move to Mr. Rao again. Mr. Rao, your views on the same issue.
I think we are all talking about, so I think what government need to do and what private players has, I will just articulate 2-3 important points. One, government, in my view, I think the government investments in creating infrastructure must go up. Typically, if you look at it, countries like UK, Germany, Japan, all of them are spending at least 1.3% of the GDP for creating infrastructure. Where is India today? Telecom infrastructure, digital infrastructure doesn't have any government allocation. There is huge budget being allocated for physical infrastructure. India needs now a digital infrastructure. Where is that fund allocation happening? I think it's very important to allocate at least a good amount of the at least budget for the year coming under digital infrastructure. Of course, we'll talk about what are the ways to get funding for those kind of infrastructure. So government need to step up and invest more, not only relying upon private investment. I think NDCP policy envisages that. I think you can't only expect that private investments coming in for realizing this vision. That's one. Second is, as I said, that ROW policy on the 4 points, a single nodal agency, 30-day deemed approval, dig once rule, and utility corridor, and moreover, give a digital infrastructure a essential utility status. Period. Everything set. If somebody is obstructing this digital infrastructure deployment, it should be considered as a criminal action, because we are putting our future generation at risk by not doing this infrastructure in the country, because future is digital. This is second. I think third important thing I think government need to definitely promote with respect to Atmanirbhar technologies is encourage R&D investments in India. It is not only for Make in India, it is Make in India for the world. I think India needs to promote significant research and development investment and promote technologies which are where IPR is rested in India, and completely disruptive technologies and need to be promoted, needs to be encouraged. I think what private needs to do is, Dr. Bhattacharya, is that we need to keep nation at first always. We need to get away from our individual priorities, individual objectives. We need to say India today. I think when will we see this India as a developed country? And this is the right time to actually put India into the developed country roadmap. And I think it is possible with digital economy. We need to collaborate more with the government. We need to make sure that policy is done in the right direction. That is what all of our private players must do, and imbibe that new technologies to deploy digital infrastructure. It's not only fiber, it is about 5G technologies. It's all about how we can get 5G access to the teams very fast. Like what Mr. Ashutosh said, that we should look at some of the interesting disruptive ideas like creating a fiber grid, and why do we need to, how do you utilize existing assets itself? There could be a lot of new technologies which can be built in to promote existing infrastructure for better utilization as well. We need to look
Absolutely.
at all of that.
Absolutely. In fact, Mr. Rao, we have done a splendid job with a much more difficult infrastructure, which is a road infrastructure.
Yeah.
It actually requires land acquisition, change of land rules, and so on and so forth. And the good part is that with every road that's been rolled out, at least the policy was that fiber will be rolled out along with it. So where there's a will, there literally is a way. There is a road that can be rolled out, and therefore some of the suggestions that Mr. Ashutosh made, it is possible to implement all of that. So over to you, Mr. Ashutosh, Vasant, on the same topic, and then your views and rejoinders.
Mr. Jaijit, Dr. Jaijit, I would just say what idea I proposed was using what is available. There's something wishless, something to be done. Here I'm talking about what is already available. People don't know how to use it. Number of state electricity boards have fiber laid, but they don't know what to do of it. Or they have isolated islands, and so they can't monetize it because no customer says, I want only connectivity in Haryana. He's looking for connectivity in Haryana to a data center in Mumbai or in Calcutta or in Delhi. So when you integrate, you create value for all. So like what Vasant said, the local operator, the local municipality wants money. Everybody gets money because it can be revenue shared based on what hall you run onto their network. We are successfully running it through a RailWire collaboration platform, and we have seen the success of it. We have sorted this problem of everybody's jumping and saying, what's in it for me? There is everybody gets what in it for them through a digital distribution with no government agency holding back as to a challenge on revenue distribution, automated, every 7 days revenue distribution. I think we have to work on it, something like that.
Fair point. Fair point. Mr. Billa, moving to you, your views.
I think completely agree with the panelists, and Mr. Rao made a very valid point here around creating the utility, let's say, duct along with every infrastructure, physical infrastructure that we create. I think that makes it fairly simple for us moving forward as to create this new digital infrastructure which is required. Secondly, as Mr. Vasant already pointed out, there are already a lot of assets which can be integrated. So completely agree with that. And the other thing is, if the infrastructure and the fiber is reliable, the technology is available today to actually double the capacity of existing networks which are already there without even doing anything. Because if the quality of fiber is better, the capacity that can run on those fibers is actually doubled or close to double. So there are things which are existing, and if we can improve the quality of delivery there, the existing infrastructure can actually step up to actually take the load of what is required.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much, Mr. Billa. And I think we're almost run out of time. So a quick, last round on what would be your top two wishes from the government or ask from the government. And again, I'll start with Mr. Dua as to what would be your top two asks from the government.
But I would again and again say that one, the guideline which have come, they need to be now enforced through an amendment of the Indian Telegraph Act 1885, which has the capability, which has the lines available to ensure that the guidelines and ROW, what Vasant says can be assured, but they can be enforced also. And number two, to get into all these technology, to enforce all this technology, I think the government land buildings, which are again a huge asset available to them, again, monetization is not there. You go to any government, even the central government and the state government, they need to be educated, need to be made aware that their buildings which are available, they can be monetized, because it becomes easier for the infrastructure to be laid out, because it provides you all facilities, availability of electricity, security, both are very important, security of the telecom assets. So these are two things which should be done immediately to ensure that we are on board with the new technologies.
Absolutely. Mr. Rao?
So I think two, three things. One is that I think immediately setting up this broadband infrastructure fund, because if digital infrastructure is requires a lot of capital expenditure, government must take active role, and central government must create this infrastructure fund. And there are ways. I think the way roadways has created their funds for creating infrastructure, getting bonds issued, getting all the entire fund can be restructured, and this is something which they need to do urgently. This will actually propel this whole growth in the country in terms of infrastructure and digital economy. Second is about thinking loud around this creating wholesale entity model. A country like us must have an infrastructure which is ready and fully set to be able to provide next generation applications and access of all the kinds of services. And I think this can be set up with the government and private thing, and which should be built keeping a future requirements in mind. Because currently, whatever is BharatNet, etc., it is done keeping only a very simple application. We need to look at it creating an infrastructure which is going to live for next 25 years. So there are two major recommendations from our side.
Very well put. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Rao.
I have only one,
Yeah.
because you said, what do you expect from the government?
Yes.
Responsive decision-making, ownership being shown at all leadership levels. That's the only ask. Transparent, open, ownership, owning, decisive leadership at every level. All your problems are sorted.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vasant. Mr. Billa, you started the session.
Vasant is laughing. Vasant is laughing. I appreciate that.
I wish the government could own this.
Thank you, sir.
Well, especially when the winds are that the government does not want to own anything.
Dr. Jaijit, you deserve compliments for managing the timing and keeping all the panelists engaged. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vasant. But I'll still wait for Mr. Billa's last words as he started the session. So over to you, Mr. Billa.
Sure. I think the two top things are, this definitely needs to be a shared responsibility. So the way I see it happening is getting into a kind of public-private partnership model in multiple things, whether it's fiber, whether it's infrastructure. So I think those things are important, because the government can solve certain problems, and the private players can actually come and maintain those networks for a long period of time, right? Because somebody needs to also maintain and run those things, or run the technology along with it. So I think that's the way certain problems can be solved, and that's the way I see things going forward.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Billa, and thank you, everyone. This was a very, very insightful session. I personally learned a lot. I think and I hope that this will go a long way into contributing to the government's thought process and eventually helping build the next generation of digital infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Dua. Thank you, Mr. Billa, Mr. Rao, Mr. Vasant. Thank you so much for a very enlightening session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, all panelists, please.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.